protesting against these new labour reforms, which the government is desperately trying to pass because they've got a 10% unemployment rate. Basically, these labour reforms say that governments have the right to hire and fire people if they're performing poorly as a company. I mean, God forbid they would want to do that, right? They also say they have the right to ask employees in France to work more than 35 hours a week. Again, God forbid that you would be asked to work more than 35 hours a week. And of course, this goes back to the stereotype, which I'm afraid is true in many cases. And, you know, I love France. I visit France regularly. My parents live there. The culture's good. The food's great. But French people are really lazy. I'm sorry, but the stereotype is true. They've got this huge leftist union movement, which is a hangover from basically communists from the 60s. And every single time they try to stimulate the economy by giving businesses more freedom to excel, to hire people who actually do the job, do a good job, and to not be beholden to employees like it's some kind of welfare, they riot in the streets. You know, their 3-hour lunch breaks aren't long enough, apparently. And now they're also protesting against this law in France, which they've just passed. They made it a law that a company with over 50 employees in France, if it sends out a work email to an employee outside of work hours, then that's a crime. They actually passed that as a law in France. So if you leave work as one of these, you know, bedwetting labour union members who has a tantrum if he's asked to work over 35 hours a week, if you leave work at 5 o'clock and you get a work email at 5:30, whether you read it or not, whether you respond to it or not, that is a crime by the company that sent out that email. Is it really any wonder that France's economy is in the toilet right now, that they've got a 10% unemployment rate, the combination of kowtowing to Islamists, to these ghettos, inviting more attacks, and then again kowtowing to these leftists who are now rioting in the streets, just like the Islamists are, attacking police and basically causing absolute bedlam. And it goes back to that stereotype, which I'm afraid is, in most cases, very true. French people are very lazy. It's a hangover from this communist labour union movement, and it's causing all kinds of problems for their, quote, economic recovery, which has never happened because they're so deeply entrenched in the EU's anemic economic growth that they can't get out of it. And the government's desperately trying to pass these laws to reinvigorate the business market, and they're basically rioting in the streets because of it, because it's this communist labour movement hangover, and they're stereotypically very lazy people. Sorry. Which brings me on to this article out the College Fix. Social science professor defends stereotypes, says many are accurate. My God, could it be that logic and facts are actually true once again? A Rutgers University social science professor set out to research how stereotypes are inaccurate. So he set out to prove that they're inaccurate and they're just down to racial and gender prejudices, so he could proclaim and promote that to the world with hard scientific data, but eventually made a startling discovery. Most stereotypes are accurate. Well, what do you know? Scholarly claims of stereotype inaccuracy are baseless, Dr. Lee Jussim told the College Fix in an interview. He says, quote, "When I first began my research, I had assumed all those social scientists declaring stereotypes to be inaccurate were right, so I wanted to know the basis for those claims." So he basically dug down into the basis for all these studies, all these claims that stereotypes about race, about gender, about whatever, are based on inaccurate prejudices. Turns out that's not true. Many researchers cite social psychologist Gordon Allport's classic book, The Nature of Prejudice, in support of the claim that stereotypes are inaccurate, or at least exaggerations of real differences. But Allport relied on a few anecdotes, hardly scientific evidence, Jussim said. So this researcher basically found that these stereotypes about race and gender and politics as well were generally, not always, but generally found to be true. So once again, expect this guy to be viciously attacked by social justice warriors for daring to point out the fact that whether due to biological differences, race differences, IQ differences, gender behavior differences, that all humans are not the same, and they tend to engage in stereotypical behavior. God forbid he's had an objective, reality-based perspective on that, and he's revealed himself as a hate criminal to the College Fix. So expect him to be viciously attacked by social justice warriors over the coming days. Now, Alex talked about this in the show, of course. The EU is linked up with Twitter and tech firms to combat hate speech. Again, this is the EU Commission, which is an unelected body, which acts as both the legislative and the executive of Europe. There's no separation of powers, and these people aren't elected in the first place. This is a dictatorship. So it's no surprise that they're now teaming up with Facebook and Twitter to censor, quote, hate speech. Hate speech about the amazing Muslim migrants who are bringing so much cultural enrichment to the continent of Europe. Now, of course, we know how they characterize some of that hate speech, because we had this headline out of Breitbart from back in January: "You tweet a lot, watch your tone. Cops threaten Dutchman for opposing government mass migration plans." So a guy in the Netherlands who tweeted that he thought his government's refugee policy was a bad plan got a home visit from the police. That's the new definition of hate speech. And listen to this quote from Vera Jourova, the EU Commissioner responsible for justice, consumers and gender equality. Again, unelected, nobody even knows who she is, represents a dictatorial body, a Byzantine empire. Quote, "The internet is a place for free speech, not hate speech." Okay, under the First Amendment, as the Supreme Court has defined it over and over again, hate speech is free speech. You have to defend unpopular speech for free speech to exist at all. But of course, the First Amendment definition of free speech, which the Supreme Court has upheld, has not been applied globally because it actually defends free speech. What they're actually applying in terms of this EU Commission Twitter plan to censor, quote, hate speech is the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which of course doesn't give us any human rights, because under Article 20, brackets 2 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, when it applies to free speech, it says, quote, that it does not require states to prohibit all negative statements towards national groups, races, or religions, but as soon as a statement, quote, constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, it must be banned. So in other words, if you discriminate against, I don't know, for example, a belief system that condones stoning women to death or throwing gays off buildings, then that's discrimination. And that is not allowed under this definition of hate speech, which has been created, which has been contrived by the United Nations and then adopted globally. They claim to be defending your free speech. They claim to afford you these great human rights. And when you actually drill down into the details, free speech which offends someone, which discriminates against their religious beliefs, is hate speech. It will not be allowed. It will be banned, which is exactly what they've already introduced in Facebook and Twitter. You know, the option to report people because you disagree with their opinion or because they offended your religion. They've already had those options in place for over a year now, and they're simply codifying it with that EU enforcement arm to actually go after people who criticize this insane migrant policy. We'll be back in the final segment of The Alex Jones Show, Infowars.com. Stay tuned. We are back. It's the fourth hour, final segment of The Alex Jones Show live. Let's hit a final few news stories. Of course, we've got the big, massive controversy over Harambe the gorilla. Now, the debate is over whether they should have shot the gorilla or not, but what was most interesting in the immediate aftermath of this news story, and in fact for hours afterwards, these social justice warriors who are obsessed, absolutely fixated with injecting identity politics into absolutely everything, they blamed this little black boy falling into a gorilla pit and being saved. Who did they blame it on? Well, white people, of course. And I, in fact, put out a tweet yesterday where all these individuals, you know, Black Lives Matter activists, SJWs, rushed to blame the gorilla being shot on white privilege. And you can see all these tweets on my Twitter. They were like, the gorilla was only shot to save the white boy. If this boy had been black, they would have just left it to die. That was the tone of the tweets. Of course, the little boy in the gorilla pit was black. His parents were black. And yet immediately they sought to inject racial identity politics into a news story that had nothing whatsoever to do with race. So you can go and check out those tweets on my Twitter. Facebook, using people's phones to listen in on what they're saying, suggests Professor. The company says that it does use people's microphones, but only to help them out. Of course, that relates to the ambient background noise which they listen to target you with ads. We've been reporting on that since at least 2006. Now a top professor's talking about it. RT reports outrage as Dutch authorities give up to 10,000 euros to refugees to go shopping. Some Dutch residents are outraged after finding some... all of them should be, after finding out that a few cities have been offering as much as 10,000 euros to refugees to buy furniture and other necessities. Again, people living on the dole, on welfare in the Netherlands, won't even earn 10,000 euros a year. These precious migrants are being handed it with a check as soon as they arrive. They're being kicked out of their own housing to accommodate these migrants. But the Dalai Lama has come out and actually defended Christian Europe, you know, done the job that the Islamist Pope is supposed to do, which he doesn't. Dalai Lama warns against taking too many migrants. Arab domination, migrants should return. This is out of Breitbart. The Dalai Lama has said there are too many migrants pouring into Europe, warning against the continent becoming Arabized and claiming the solution is the eventual repatriation of migrants. Striking a somewhat different tone to the Pope, who, of course, a couple of weeks ago came out and said that ISIS was just like Jesus, just like Jesus' disciples spreading their message across the Middle East. Of course, I don't remember that Bible passage where Jesus' disciples beheaded people, took women as sex slaves, and forced people to pay a tax on pain of death if they didn't convert. Must have missed that Bible verse there. So the Pope is, you know, open arms. He's busy giving awards to his fellow massive hypocrite, George Clooney, who has like 5 mansions, but says that German villages of 70 people should accept 700 migrants, while he doesn't accept a single one into any of his 5 mansions with their 8, 9, 10 empty bedrooms. He's meeting with the Pope while the Pope invites this mass invasion of Muslim migrants, and it takes the Dalai Lama to actually defend Christianity in Europe. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Alex Jones Show. Alex will be back tomorrow, 11 to 2. And be sure to check out InfoWars Nightly News. Breaking news at Infowars.com. Thanks for joining us.